Tell us about some of the lies that led us into war.
Well, I mean, of course, that Saddam and Osama were working together, that Iraq had anything to do with 9/11, that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And when I was in front of the Downing Street memo hearing in Washington, D.C. on June 16th, 2005, the one that John Conyers gave, I talked about, it was in 1999, an author, Mickey Huskovitz, was writing a book about George Bush. So it was going to be a biography, and he was interviewing George Bush in 1999, and George Bush said, if I ever become president, I'm going to go get Saddam Hussein. I'm not going to stop at the border like my dad did. I'm not going to make that mistake. And so I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact wording about that. But so this was, and I think it was it the first cabinet meeting George Bush had? I think Ron Feinstein reported on this. He said, so how do we get Saddam?
Basically, what Paul O'Neill said, the Secretary of Treasury back then, on the first principals meeting 10 days after his inauguration, the topic was Iraq, and he said that topic A was Iraq, and it was essentially about the president asking them to, quote, go find me a way to do this. So,
right.
Go ahead.
So anyway, I mean, those are basically the mushroom cloud line that the next probable Democratic nominee for president, Hillary Clinton, was in on, that scandal. And then there was the Iraq White House group that actually was convened to figure out how to sell the war to the gullible American public.
That included Judith Miller. She was among the White House Iraq group, and remember, she was the one to write those articles for the Times.
Right. They should all be tried for war crimes and crimes against humanity. They should all be in prison.
Yeah, they should all be in prison. And with regards to the lie that Iraq had something to do with 9/11, I have a few bits of information that I'm going to read. And this is a quote from Helen Thomas. She said, you couldn't sit in that press room day after day, every time it was mentioned by Ari Fleischer or Scott, they would say in one breath, 9/11, Saddam Hussein, 9/11, Saddam Hussein. I don't blame the American people for thinking there was a tie, end quote. And that's from Helen Thomas. And I have some polls. Nearly 7 in 10 Americans believe it is likely that ousted Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein was personally involved in the September 11th attacks, says a poll out almost 2 years after the terrorist strike against this country. That's from USA Today, September 6, 2003. 41% of Americans answered yes to the question, do you think Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq was directly involved in planning, financing, or carrying out the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. That was 41% of Americans, and that was in June 24th, 2007. There was a poll conducted in April 2003 that asked whether or not Saddam was personally involved in 9/11. 53% said yes. And the last quote I want to get, or poll that I want to bring attention to, is a Lemoyne College Zogby poll from February 2006, taken of soldiers serving in Iraq, said that, quote, 85% said the U.S. mission is to, quote, retaliate for Saddam's role in the 9/11 attacks. That's 85% of the soldiers serving in Iraq. 77% said that they also believed the main or major reason for the war was to, quote, stop Saddam from protecting al-Qaeda in Iraq. Can you imagine what the soldiers were being told?
Yeah. He never believed it. He didn't want to go.
Huh?
Casey never believed it. He didn't want to go.
Right. Yeah, that's a lie. That's a lie that a lot of people say, is that Casey volunteered and he was so patriotic, and it was nothing of the sort. He did not agree with this war at all. So I want to read a little quote. Quote, President Bush and his top aides publicly made 935 false statements about the security risk posed by Iraq in the 2 years following September 11, 2001, according to a study released Tuesday by two nonprofit journalism groups. The study says Bush made 232 false statements about Iraq and former leader Saddam Hussein's possessing weapons of mass destruction, and 28 false statements about Iraq's links to Al-Qaeda, end quote. And that's from CNN from January 24th, 2009. Now you're talking about people falling for the propaganda, and it's not only the statements that they make, it's the corporate media that parrot what they say over and over and over again, and it begins to brainwash people.